Hello and welcome to this free webinar brought to you by Acres USA and Growers Secret. I'm your host, Ben Trollinger, and we're joined today by Dr. Wesley Chun. He's a PhD plant pathologist, a molecular biologist, and the Chief Science Officer at Growers Secret Incorporated. He's also the co-discoverer of Growers Secret Professional. Dr. Chun has worked in the area of plant bacteriology, extension pathology, food security, and agricultural education. And he's currently involved in researching and promoting organic food plant production. Today, Dr. Chun is going to tell us why organic fertilizers can be an important part of sustainable agricultural systems, and why some organic fertilizers, such as soy-based amino acids, are particularly attractive due to their efficient use of nitrogen and potential plant health benefits. Dr. Chun previously served as an associate professor of plant pathology and plant bacteriology at the University of Idaho, and he's recognized internationally as an expert in bacterial identification and foodborne toxins. And he joins us today from beautiful Hawaii, which makes me a little jealous. It was 20 below zero this morning in the Colorado mountains where I live. But beyond that, we want to remind you that before Dr. Chun begins his presentation, that there's going to be a Q&A session afterward. So please submit any questions that you have into the chat, and I'm going to try to get to as many of those as I can. And so without any further ado, please welcome Dr. Wesley Chun.
Well, thank you, everyone, and well, good morning from Hawaii. As Ben said, I'm the Chief Science Officer at Growers Secret. And throughout my career, basically my job has had to answer tough questions that are very hard to answer. So I've managed to be able to develop the ability to take highly technical and complicated things that are boring, and turn it into things that are simple and fun. So hopefully you have so much fun today that you won't realize that you've actually learned something. Now, every good story has a beginning, and ours starts in Maui, where my friend Brian Hiramoto was raising mushrooms for fresh market consumption. So he was raising what we call pepeao, which is the forest ear fungus, and also shiitake mushrooms. But one day he got his material contaminated, and that's when he called me up while I was working at the University of Idaho. And to make a long story short, throughout a series of 1,000 phone calls, numerous, maybe visits back and forth, sending materials back and forth to each other, we ended up discovering a unique organic plant growth enhancer. So it worked wonders with synthetic fertilizers. And I thought, well, we need to find a good organic fertilizer that would work well with this organic plant growth enhancer. So the plant growth enhancer was called Growers Secret Professional. We spent a couple years, lots of blood, sweat, and tears, mostly tears, to get it OMRI approved. So it's on the OMRI list for use for organic production. But my first test that I did, I used fish emulsion. And in comparing the results of using a growth enhancer with our fish emulsion versus a synthetic fertilizer, I was rudely disappointed, to be honest. The plants didn't grow quite as fast as the synthetic fertilizers. And I thought, well, the problem is that I just don't know enough about organic fertilizers. And then I better go back to school and go through the organic fertilizer 101 process and relearn everything again. So here's what I put together for the 101 section here, is that organic fertilizers, they're manufactured from mine minerals, animal materials, or plant materials. There are some other exceptions to this, but mostly falls in these categories. Synthetic fertilizers are composed of synthesized or processed chemicals. Now, the nice The thing about synthetic fertilizers is that it does not provide carbon. Most organic fertilizers provide some carbon, which is great in that it supports microbial growth. With synthetic fertilizers, because it doesn't have any carbon, you're basically providing food for the plant. With organic fertilizers, because it does have carbon along with the nitrogen, you are feeding both the soil and the planet. And by soil, I mean the microbes that live in the soil. Because microbes need to have carbon in order to grow. And you need the microbes to be active and functioning in order to convert the organic fertilizers into something that the plant can use. Now, one key thing I noticed about the organic fertilizers versus synthetic fertilizers is that synthetic fertilizers are immediately available to the plant. So that's why the synthetic fertilizer I used with a growth enhancer worked well, because our growth enhancer was pushing the plants to grow faster. And while it was doing so, it needs to have additional sources or additional loads of nutrients available. And this could be provided by the synthetic fertilizers. With organic fertilizers, they are variable in availability. In other words, that a lot of the fertilizer, while it's there, has to be broken down into a mineralized form for the plant to use. And that sort of explains why the fish emulsion didn't work, because it needs microbes to work. And so for me, using fish emulsion as a foliar test, I made 2 great mistakes over there. And this is how we learn, though. We make mistakes, we figure out what we did wrong, and then start approaching it from a different angle. And then I started to look at organic fertilizers a little more and notice that most organic fertilizers have a lower NPK values, or nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium values per unit weight versus synthetic fertilizers, which generally are higher. The end result of this is that you have a lower cost per unit nitrogen, but also for the other nutrients that are there. You have a higher cost when it comes to organic fertilizers. And that became a questionable point in my mind early on in our work. So to give you an example, if you take a look at alfalfa pellets, it's a 2, some of them is around 2, 0.25, and a 2. It does have a good carbon nitrogen ratio, which I said is good because it helps maintain the microorganisms, or help them to grow. It's a slow release fertilizer. So you're looking at fertilizer that's going to take somewhere around 2 to 6 weeks for release. You would apply it at 1 ton per acre per year. Blood meal is also another slow release fertilizer. Feather meal is a slow one. Fish emulsion is a medium one, but still, there is still, it needs to be broken down in order for the plant to use. Composted manure is a slow one. Chicken litter is probably the slowest. It takes about 6 months for it to become mineralized for the plant. And so obviously these things weren't going to work very well with our organic plant growth stimulant, because if we used those fertilizers, the nutrients would be released at a certain rate, depending on the microbial activity and the type of fertilizer that we use. And so pushing the plants to grow faster, we need to find an external source, an additional source of fertilizer that the plants could use. So early on, most of these things were available, and later in the picture became soy amino acids. It had a higher NPK, nitrogen content, so 14%. It's a 3-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, and it's a fast release. A fast release is actually what we were looking for, because in radioactive labeling studies, it looks like it's anywhere from hours to days for that nutrient to become available for the plant. Sorry. Okay, so to summarize in a simpler way is that I kind of look at things, I try to put things into black and white, and sometimes it's a little bit of a gray area. So here's the good part about organic fertilizers. They're organic approved. So if you're an organic grower, you can use these fertilizers and for your organic crops. It provides carbon because your microbes need carbon in order for it to grow and to maintain themselves and to break down organic matter. There are other positives that organic fertilizers have, such as alfalfa has growth enhancers in it. Some of you might have used seaweed products. These things also have growth enhancers as well as the potassium that's there. The okay part of it is that they are variable release, which is great, depending on what your crop needs. So you could use a slow release fertilizer that releases over the full year, for certain crops. Others that need, rapid release, you can use things that are available more, much quickly. The ugly part, then this is still going back a few years, is that it looks like it costs more per unit nitrogen. And to get to this and take a look at it a little more closely, if you use urinal UAN 32, you would spend about $288, for a season to grow lettuce if you were going to put 240 pounds of nitrogen per acre for that lettuce. With anhydrous ammonia, you would spend around $80. Urea, you would spend about $185. And with the price of soy amino acids, to put on 140 pounds of nitrogen per acre would cost you $5,900. So pick up your jaws from the ground, because that's what happened to me when I first worked this thing out. But what it turns out now is that people are actually using around 10 pounds of our soy amino acids twice a month for 3 months. And that cost is around $350. So that brings the price of using soy amino acids as a nitrogen source much closer to the numbers that that are being used for synthetic fertilizers. So that seemed a little bit more reasonable. But now I started to question this, because if you wanted to put 140 pounds of nitrogen per acre, and you're putting on this much, anhydrous ammonia per se, if you use this amount here, which is the 10 pounds per month, okay, if you're using that 10 pounds per month, 3 months, twice a month, so you'd be putting on a total of 60 pounds. That would come out to about around 10 pounds or so of actual nitrogen that you're putting on. So all of a sudden, light bulbs went off in my head, and I said, well, hey, what's going on over here? Why are we putting on less nitrogen in pounds compared to the synthetic fertilizers? So I needed to find good reasons why. So then, once again, when a perplexing problem comes up, I go back to the beginning, and then I start looking at things all over again. So the first thing I started to go and take a look at was the organic nitrogen pool, to see how nitrogen would behave in it. So in the soil, you have plant litter, dead animals, goat creatures, you have microbes. These things are your organic matter that's in the soil. But most of this material is not available to the plants. They have to be broken down into amino acids. And so they are broken down by the action of the microbes. Sorry, I'm not sure why it's jumping around. So, and you do have a good pool of glutamic acid, glutamine, aspartic acid, asparagine, alanine, and histidine. Now, these 6 amino acids are the major amino acids that you'll find in this soil. They constitute somewhere around 30 to 50% of the total soil nitrogen. So there's quite a lot there. There's also nitrogen that is fixed by free living organisms. So you have nitrogen here. It takes energy in the form of 16 ATP or adenosine triphosphate molecules to make 2 ammonia molecules here. So that's another source of nitrogen that's present in the soil. So all of these things lead to the production of mineralized nitrogen, which is the nitrogen that's available to the plant. So mineralization is actually a set of 3 different processes. One is aminization, where you have the complex proteins. So you have the plant material, the animal material. These things are broken down into amino acids, amides, and amines. Modification is your second step in the mineralization process. These are when you have low molecular weight organic molecules. I apologize, I have no clue why it's jumping around. These things are then broken down into ammonium. The process called nitrification is done by 2 different types of bacteria, Nitrobacter and Nitrosomus. And that is when it takes ammonia, breaks it down into nitrite, and then which is rapidly converted into nitrate. So either ammonium or nitrate are now mineralized forms of the nitrogen that are available to the plant. So I had to take one step back again to take a better look at the whole picture about nitrogen and nitrogen cycling. So these are 6 major areas where people are focusing their attention with nitrogen cycling. One is changes in land use, because as we shift our agricultural lands to more marginal areas because of land and population growth, we're actually becoming more intensive with nitrogen use. Waste water management is another issue, because about 70% of the nitrogen that goes through food ends up into the wastewater management. So usually this is being mitigated by actions of having treatment sites, etc. But sometimes there can be a breakdown in the process and you'll get a release of nitrogen. Industrial processes, such as the making of plastics and nylon, is also a great contributor to the, nitrogen in our environment, as the plastics and materials that are made break down over time. Fossil fuel combustion pushes out nitrates into the air. Manure management, I don't need to talk much about that, because everybody knows the issues that deal with managing manure. As you feed the animals, they're going to have poop, and then that is another source of nitrogen and phosphates that can be deleterious to our environment. What I wanted to focus on was nitrogen fertilizer use, and take a better look at how synthetic and organic sources compare with each other. So one of the terms to think about is nitrogen use efficiency, which is, basically how much nitrogen is put into your system versus how much of it is actually used by the plant. And this can be broken down into 3 general areas. One is, how do the plants take up this nitrogen? The second would be, how do plants use this nitrogen? And the third was, how is this nitrogen moved around in the plants? And this is where I started to find differences between organic and synthetic nitrogen in the plant that could explain why we could get by with less organic nitrogen amino acids compared to synthetic nitrogen. So I started to dig into this a little bit deeper, that both synthetic or amino acid nitrogen and synthetic nitrogen, they both have to have a way to get into the leaves and the roots. And for both of these systems, there are transport systems. Some of these things are low affinity systems. The other category we call is high affinity systems. Both of these type of systems require energy. So basically, we don't see any major differences in energy use by the plant for taking up either amino acid nitrogen or synthetic nitrogen. Amino acid nitrogen has an advantage, though, is that it can be transported within the plant via the xylem and the phloem, versus synthetic nitrogen, which can only be transported in the xylem, with the exception of some highly regulated movement of nitrates within the phloem, can occur. So amino acids, which is one of the major things that we could think about now or remember, is that amino acids are used directly for protein synthesis. Whereas with synthetic nitrogen, which you're looking at nitrates and ammonium, it has to be converted into an amino acid before it can be used to make proteins. So energetically in the plant, what we're looking at is if you have a nitrate, it has to be reduced to nitrite, which is then reduced to ammonium, which is then made into glutamine, which is the first amino acid that's produced in a cycle. This glutamine then, combined with more ammonium or other amino acids, makes the rest of the amino acids that are needed by a plant. Now, this process of doing the conversion from nitrate to nitrite uses an enzyme called cytoplasm nitrate reductase. And the thing to take a look at here is that it takes an NADPH molecule. Now, in a plant, an NADPH molecule is an energy molecule. And these things come from photosynthesis, where the plant is taking sunlight and converting it into energy that it can use for its metabolic processes. So it's already using some energy here to do the first step of conversion into nitrite. From nitrite, it takes 6 ferredoxins to convert the molecule into ammonium. So now you're looking at another good number, and energy equivalent sort of says about 2 ferredoxins per NADPH. So the next step is you have ammonium, takes a glutamate molecule, and makes glutamine. It takes glutamine synthase and 1 ATP molecule, which is about the equivalent of 2 ferredoxin molecules. So what you're seeing here is that the conversion or use of nitrate into making an amino acid, glutamine here, takes close to 7 ATP molecules. And that's quite a lot of energy for a plant to use. And if we had glutamine available that the plant could use, it doesn't have to go through all of these steps. So the plant has extra ATP in their system, which can be used for other things like growing, producing reproductive parts, host plant resistance, or dealing with stress. So there's a lot of advantages to using amino acids, that you save a lot of energy in the plant. But in the plant, it is found that asparagine and glutamine are most abundant in the xylem. So here, what it appears to be is that the amino acids is a currency of nitrogen. All the amino acids are transported through the phloem. So that also tells you that amino acids are a form of currency for moving nitrogen throughout the plant. I apologize for the slides, I'm sure. So I summarized this into a diagram to try and put everything into perspective. So if we start here with atmospheric nitrogen, that can be fixed in certain plants that you're all probably familiar with, like rhizobium and bradyrhizobium and nodulation. The nitrogen can be fixed to make ammonium. Now remember, that takes ATP. And those ATPs comes from the plant. So that is an energy drain on the plant to do atmospheric nitrogen fixation in nodules. If you look at the soil, it has the amino acid pool that we talked about, but you can also have ammonium from microbial products. You can have nitrates also as an end result of microbial products, or you can have ammonium and nitrates that were added in through synthetic fertilizers. Now, all these three things here are taken up into the plant roots. All of these things here can be taken up either by passive mechanisms or by active transport mechanisms, which requires a bit of energy. If you look at nitrate can get into the plant. The plant has to expend energy, like we showed in the previous slide, to reduce it to nitrite, which then is made into ammonium. Ammonium, once it enters plant, or if it comes from the nitrate pathway here, then can be made into amino acids. But if we have amino acids present and it gets into the plant, that gets directly used into the system over here, which then can be transported through the xylem or through the phloem. Amino acids can be made into proteins in the root, or if it's translocated up into the foliar portions, this can be made into proteins there. If you're looking at nitrates is transported through the xylem, can get up into the foliar portions of the plant. It has to be then converted into nitrite and then ammonium. And once again, these are all energy requiring steps. Ammonium can then be made into amino acids, which is then used for making, proteins in the seed, or proteins for the leaf and the shoot. So the diagram kind of shows that if you use amino acids, you save quite a lot of energy here that the plant doesn't have to expend. And that energy can be used for other uses in the plant. So to test this, we decided to do a field test. We use our grower secret nitrogen, which is a soy-based amino acid nitrogen. It has an analysis of 1400, which is on our label, but current analysis takes it up to near about 16. We compared it with calcium nitrate, applied it at, Okay, so we applied it to get a total of 120 pounds of nitrogen per acre. We did that for the grower secret nitrogen. And so we have it at 120, at 90, 60, and 30 pounds. And we did the same thing with calcium nitrate, 120, 90, 60, and 30 pounds. When we took a look at the data, we started to see that And I want you to take a look here at the grower secret nitrogen at 60 pounds. We ended up with around 495 bushels per acre. The head size is about 48.7. Our head weight was 2783 grams, 2,783 grams. Now, if you take a look at this, that is kind of similar to calcium nitrate at 120 pounds or at 90 pounds. And actually, it's even better than lower calcium nitrate levels at 60 and 30. So we could use about half as much pounds of organic nitrogen to achieve similar results to that of calcium nitrate. That was quite interesting to me, in that if you notice that the applications were done at 3 different times, at planting, once as a foliar in September, and again as a foliar in October. So by having these amounts delivered over just 3 different application dates, we're actually putting on quite a bit of nitrogen at one time. And right now, if you split this thing up into smaller, I think we can get even better results. So to summarize the data that we have is that 60 pounds of amino acid nitrogen works as well as 120 pounds of calcium nitrate. And that's comparing head size, head weight, bushels per acre. Some of the observations that also happened with the field is that we had increased plant vigor, head size, and the yield. So just from this field experiment here, it looks as if amino acid fertilizers are more efficient than synthetic fertilizers in delivering nitrogen to plants. And this can be explained by how the nitrogen is used in the plant, how it's converted into proteins, and how it's able to mobilize within the plants. So early on, when we first brought amino acid nitrates onto the scene, the feedback or pushback we got was that this thing costs too much. We can't put this much on the field and make any money from growing our crops. And the answer is that you don't have to put this much. It may be even at a point where it becomes cost neutral, because we're close to, you have to use as much organic amino acids to supply the end for a plant. And that's because of nitrogen use efficiency, is that plants can use amino acid nitrogen much more efficiently than synthetic nitrogen. In multiple studies, people are estimating that somewhere around 50% of synthetic nitrogen, when applied, is lost or not used by the plant. So that's not a very efficient process. In the case of amino acid nitrogen, it might be different because what the plants don't use are immediately used by the microbes, and the microbes help retain it within the organic nitrogen amino acid soil profile. And when the microorganisms die, they release the amino acids for use by the plant. So we're not getting overall loss of amino acid nitrogen over time as we would with synthetic nitrogen. Organic nitrogen amino acids have additional health benefits that can be considered. Some of these things are like alanine is known to participate in viral resistance in the plant. Arginine is important for cell division in the plant. Both alanine and arginine are involved with cold weather resistance. Arginine and asparagine are important for germination. Hydroxyproline and proline are involved with anti-stress, plant growth and development, and pollen fertility. So amino acids play vital roles in the plant. Having these things readily available as the nitrogen form makes it a lot easier for the plants to utilize them for these important functions. So in summary, we had the pushback, which is costs. The answer is that's sort of mitigated by environmental health. We're not releasing excess amounts of nitrogen into the environment to cause pollution. It is organic approved. It's pretty close to cost neutral, and it gives you additional benefits because you will have healthier plants because of the roles that amino acids play in a plant's physiology. It's more efficient form of nitrogen, so you don't have to put as much in the field to achieve the same quality of plants that you do with synthetic fertilizer. And that's probably because using amino acid nitrogen fertilizers frees up a lot of energy in the form of NADH, NADPH, and ATP, which then can be used for other plant metabolic processes. So with that, leave it open for questions. If you have something that you want to ask later, you can always email me at wesc@growersecret.com. Our Growers Secret team will be at World Ag Expo next week. Please stop by and visit them. If you have questions and you want me to be involved, they will give me a call and I'll be right on the phone line with you. So thank you very much for your attention. And let's see what kind of questions we have.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chun. I appreciate that. I've collected a handful of questions, enough to get us started, but don't be shy. If you have any questions, enter those into the chat. We'll start off with a question from Ann Morley. And her question is there less runoff with organic fertilizers? Do you anticipate a shift to use of more organic with the current shortages and price increases in synthetic fertilizers? Thanks for that question, Ann.
Yeah, and that's a very good question. And that's a question that is running through our mind. We have a field experiment going on now to take a look at this. We expect to find that organic nitrogen is going to be retained in the soil and not lost out into the environment. And basically it's because of having a good microbial activity, which sort of acts as capture time release modules in your soil. And so overall, I think shifting to organic fertilizers is a definite health benefit to the environment. Then
rookie mistake there. I was on mute as I started to talk. Thanks for pointing that out, Dr. Chun. I'm a little rusty. We have a few questions from Mark Stump Allen. One of his questions is, would you consider adding root nodules to your organic amendment comparative chart?
The chart had root nodules. It was that pink thing on the side. I thought at one time that I would expand it a little bit more to show how amino acids would function with the biology of the microbes in the soil, but that would make the slide too complicated. And so, it's a good question. And so, when you feed amino acids, you're feeding a ready form of carbon and nitrogen to microorganisms. Now, microorganisms in the soil, they have a carbon-nitrogen ratio within themselves of about 24:1, which means you need 24 carbon molecules to 1 nitrogen molecule in order for them to exist. So what it is that about 8 of the carbons are used for maintenance. The rest of it is used for energy, for them to do whatever they're supposed to do, whether it is to fix nitrogen or digest material, etc. And so having organic nitrogen you're actually feeding those microorganisms to help them do the work. It doesn't do all the work, because if you took a look at the carbon nitrogen ratios of the different organic fertilizers, you notice that they are nowhere, it doesn't come close to approaching 24:1, but it does provide the extra carbon that can be used. And if you compare it against synthetic fertilizers, which got 0 carbon, you already see actual benefit. So did I get that question for you?
Yeah, I think you cleared that up. Here's another question from Mark. Would you consider adding reduced pesticide costs to the quote unquote good portion on your summary of organic amendments?
Yeah, that is actually a good topic for another talk, because my thought, okay, so let's go back a little bit. I was brought up as a standard plant bacteriologist, plant scientist, and so I was back in the era where chemistry was your answer. And then as I got into this field because of my friend's discovery, I became more of a person that believes in a healthy plant will be better off, that you'll use less pesticides over time. And as I've been helping people with their organic growth and their problems that they come across, I'm looking for ways in which to mitigate different problems, but do it in an organic fashion. And so feeding them amino acids seems to make the plants a little bit more vigorous. The plants are more vigorous. They are going to be better able to resist infection. Now, this is not a 100% type of thing. It's the type of thing where it's going to help. It's not the total answer. You need to have it integrated with other strategies that you use for the field, so, such as border areas, etc., and planting compatible crops.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, this question is from Ann Anderson. Do you think that the use of some amino acids simultaneously allows better essential metal uptake too, as many are good metal chelators?
Yeah, we actually have a line of amino acid fertilizers that are chelated with manganese or boron. And the nice thing about this is that because these are the amino acid kind of has two functions. One is actually it's kind of like a good sticker, but because it's taken up into the plants rapidly, whatever it's attached to, it's going to be dragged along and go right in. So the answer is yes. It would be a good thing to have. So we do have some products that are like that. And is this Ann Anderson from Utah?
Ann, do you want to answer that in the chat? Okay, we'll move on to the next question. This one is from, Ann says yes, from Greg Stock. Do you regard that it is wise or unwise to use both fish, hydrolysate, and grower secret amino acid nitrogen together for foliar application on grape plants?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a really short story, in that one of our very first tests was to put grower secret nitrogen as to put grower secret professional as a foliar on head cabbage, and head cabbage was side dressed with ammonium nitrate. And so we put both things down at the same time, and we got no improvement. And the answer to this was that the fertilizers that we put down as a band, in the furrow, didn't have time to solubilize and reach the roots. And so our grower secret professional stimulated the plants to grow, but they didn't have the extra nutrients available for them to do that. So we staggered the applications. You did the ammonium nitrate first, and then you do the grower secret professional 2 weeks later. So there was adequate nutrients for the plants to take up when the plants were told to get going and get faster. So now we take that analogy and throw it in with the fish. We know that fish has a very low level of ammoniacal nitrogen, but the rest of it is in complex proteins, and it has to be mineralized, right? So if I was going to use fish for a plant, I would actually put it down through the drip system, and so that it's in the soil, give the soil microbes some time to work on it, and then either do a foliar with the grower secret professional, or you can put it in about a week later after you've got the fish emulsion in. So if you understand when organic fertilizers are going to be releasing their nutrients, you'll know when best to apply the Grower Secret Professional. And you also know when the professional has to have an extra supply of foliar nutrients to maintain or support the added boost. So just to give an example, when we did experiments on tomatoes with the professional by itself, we ended up getting 30% yield increases. So we sent this thing out to Hawaii Agriculture Research Center to test as well. And they got back 30% yield increases. And that's using a standard fertilization program. Now we sent it to Dave Holden in California. This is a brilliant guy. And he said, if you're going to boost the plant to grow faster, what happens if you add a little bit more nitrogen? So he did a standard, tomato growing profile, routine. And then he added an additional 3-18-18 foliar along with the Grower Secret Professional. And he ended up getting 60% yield increases with it. So that sort of says that if you've got the nutrients available, ready to go, and you got the plant boosted up, the plant will take advantage of it. But if you have too much of a delay between the stimulation and the availability of nutrients, you just kind of wasted an effort.
Great, thanks for that. Well, our time is up today, but there's still a lot of great questions that I'm seeing in the chat. Questions from Andrew Holscher, Jillian Ford, and others. As you see on the screen and the slide, you know how to reach Dr. West there if you have other questions for him.
Yeah, please do send questions. More than happy to answer them.
Absolutely.
If there's a lot, it may take a little while for me to get through all of them, but I will do it.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Chun for his presentation today and Grower Secret for sponsoring this free webinar. For more information about Grower Secret, visit growersecret.com, and to find out more about Acres USA, visit AcresUSA.com. I want to thank you for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you. Aloha from Hawaii.